Jake Morrison walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber and felt the weight of an entire species on his shoulders. The room stretched out before him like a giant bowl with seats rising up in circles around the center where he would soon stand. Hundreds of alien beings filled those seats and their eyes followed his every step. The air smelled strange here, a mix of different atmospheres that each species needed to breathe. Jake had gotten used to it over his 3 years as Earth's ambassador, but today it felt heavier than usual. Today would decide if humans stayed part of this galactic community or were cast out into the darkness of space. He reached the speaking platform in the center and looked up at the towering figure of High Chancellor Vextar. The Zephyrian leader stood 12 feet tall with silver skin that reflected the chamber lights. His forearms moved in slow gestures as he spoke, and his voice boomed through the translation devices. "Ambassador Morrison," Vextar said, "humanity has been called before this council to answer for its actions. Your species has shown a pattern of violence and aggression that threatens the peace we have worked so hard to build." Jake felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice steady. "High Chancellor, I respectfully disagree with that assessment. Every action humanity has taken has been in defense of those who could not defend themselves." A low rumble came from the Cronin section where General Thulgak sat with his military advisors. The reptilian general's scarred hide told the story of countless battles, and his yellow eyes glowed with barely controlled anger. "Defense?" he hissed. "Your ships destroyed 3 of our battlecruisers in the Kepler system without warning." "Because those cruisers were bombarding civilian colonies," Jake replied. "Women and children were dying while you decided whether the targets were legitimate military assets. We stopped a massacre." "You interfered in internal Cronin affairs," Thulgax shot back. "Those colonies supported rebel forces. By your laws of war, they were valid targets." Jake stepped forward and his voice grew stronger. "By human laws, civilians are never valid targets. We don't wage war against children because their parents disagree with their government." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and Jake could see species dividing into groups. Some nodded in agreement while others whispered among themselves with worried expressions. The Hillyrians seemed split, their large, insect-like eyes darting between Jake and their own delegation leaders. "Chancellor," Vextar raised 2 of his arms for silence. "This is exactly the problem, Ambassador. Humanity imposes its moral standards on situations they do not fully understand. The Cronin Empire has maintained order in that sector for over 2 centuries. Your intervention has created chaos." "What we created was justice," Jake said. "And results speak louder than politics. The war in the Kepler system ended 3 days after our intervention. How long had it been raging before that? 18 months. How many more would have died if we had done nothing?" Dr. Zara Velnoth from the Hillyrian delegation stood up. Her voice was soft but clear through the translators. "The human is correct about the results. Our medical ships reported a 90% reduction in casualties after the human fleet arrived. Perhaps we should consider—" "The results are not the issue," Vextar interrupted. "The issue is precedent. If we allow one species to act unilaterally, whenever they disagree with council decisions, we have no council at all. We have chaos." Jake looked around the chamber and saw the truth in many faces. This wasn't really about the Kepler system or even about human actions. This was about fear. Fear of a species that solved problems differently, that moved faster than committees could debate, that cared more about saving lives than following procedures. "High Chancellor," Jake said, "I want to tell you about Dr. Lisa Harper. She's a human physician who spent 2 years on Hillyrian colony worlds treating bone rot disease. She didn't ask permission from the council. She didn't file reports with the medical committee. She just saw people suffering and went to help. Her treatment protocols have saved over 50,000 Hillyrian lives." Several Hillyrian delegates nodded and one called out, "Dr. Harper is considered a hero among our people." "And Commander Nick Carter," Jake continued. "He led the relief efforts when the Vorthan plague hit the Outer Rim. Human ships carried supplies, human doctors worked around the clock, and human engineers rebuilt damaged infrastructure. We didn't wait for council approval because people were dying." "Exactly our point," General Thulgak said. "You act without consultation, without regard for proper authority. You are a rogue element in civilized space. Jake felt something break inside him. 3 years of diplomacy, 3 years of trying to explain humanity to beings who seemed determined to misunderstand them. General, with respect, civilization isn't about following rules. It's about caring for each other. It's about standing up when someone needs help. It's about being willing to act when action is needed. Chancellor Vextar's silver skin darkened, and Jake knew the decision had already been made before he ever entered this chamber. This wasn't a trial or a hearing. This was a formality. The Galactic Council has deliberated, Vextar announced. By unanimous vote, humanity is expelled from Council space. All human ships, stations, and colonies must be evacuated within 1 standard year. Humans are forbidden from entering Council territory without express permission. This decision is final. Jake felt the weight of failure crush down on him. Behind him, Captain Lisa Harper of the diplomatic vessel New Frontier listened through her comlink. He knew she was already calculating routes home, already planning the largest evacuation in galactic history. "High Chancellor," Jake said one last time, "you are making a mistake. Humanity has given everything to this alliance. Our technology, our knowledge, our lives. We've asked for nothing but the chance to help build a better galaxy." "Your help is no longer required," Vextar replied coldly. Jake turned and walked toward the chamber doors. Each step felt like leaving family behind. 3 years of friendships with alien colleagues, 3 years of shared projects and common goals, 3 years of building bridges between species. All of it ending because humanity cared too much and acted too quickly. As the doors sealed behind him, Jake activated his communicator. "Captain Harper, this is Ambassador Morrison. Pack everything, we're going home." Far away on Earth, President Helen Brooks received the transmission in the Situation Room deep beneath the Capitol. She looked at the faces around the table and saw her own sadness reflected back at her. Admiral Tony Rodriguez cleared his throat and spoke the words everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, it's time to activate Exodus Protocol." Helen nodded slowly. If the galaxy wanted humanity gone, they would get their wish. But they would also learn what the galaxy looked like without human innovation, without human compassion, without human willingness to fight for what was right. The expulsion had begun, but Jake Morrison suspected that the real lesson was just starting. Commander Nick Carter stood in the main laboratory of Kepler Station and watched his team pack away 30 years of human scientific achievement. Boxes filled with research data, prototype devices, and experimental medical equipment lined the corridors. Everything that had made this the most advanced research facility in Council space was being carefully wrapped and loaded onto transport ships. The station had been humanity's crown jewel, a massive structure orbiting the gas giant Kepler 442b. Human scientists had worked alongside researchers from 12 different species, making breakthroughs in quantum mechanics, medical technology, and agricultural science. Now it was just another empty shell waiting for new occupants. Nick watched Dr. Amy Johnson seal the last container of medical samples. These samples contained the key to treating 17 different alien diseases, work that had taken human doctors decades to develop. The irony wasn't lost on him that they were taking away the very cures that alien worlds desperately needed. "Commander," came a voice behind him. Nick turned to see Dr. Zara Velnoth approaching with slow, careful steps. The Hilarion scientist's compound eyes reflected the station lights as she moved, and Nick could see the distress in her posture. "Dr. Velnoth," Nick said with genuine warmth, "I was hoping you'd come by before we finished here." "I had to try one more time," she said, her translator giving her words a musical quality. "Commander, you cannot leave. The work we were doing on dimensional barriers, the breakthrough we made last month on quantum entanglement communication, without human insight, we are decades away from completing any of it." Nick had worked with Zara for 4 years. She was brilliant, possibly the most gifted theoretical physicist in Hilarion space, but she thought like her species thought, linear, methodical, careful. Humans thought in leaps and connections, seeing patterns that others missed. "The Council made their choice, Zara," Nick said gently. "We're just following their orders." "But the medical advances," she pressed. The treatment for Cronin bone rot disease that Dr. Martinez developed. Without human understanding of biological systems, our doctors cannot replicate his work. Thousands will die. Nick felt the familiar ache in his chest. Dr. Carlos Martinez had been like a brother to him, a human physician who saw medical problems as puzzles to be solved, rather than procedures to be followed. Carlos had looked at Cronin physiology and seen connections that Hilarion doctors had missed for centuries. "I'm sorry," Nick said, "but humanity is no longer welcome in council space. If your people need medical help, they'll have to figure it out themselves." Zara's antennae drooped with defeat. The agricultural solutions for the Outer Rim colonies, the fusion reactor designs that were solving the energy crisis on Vorthan worlds, the navigation systems that made long-range exploration possible. How can the council not see what they are losing? Nick looked around the laboratory one more time. Every piece of equipment, every computer system, every experimental setup had human fingerprints on it. Not because humans had built everything, but because humans had made everything work better. They had taken alien technology and found ways to improve it, to make it safer, to make it more efficient. "Maybe they'll figure that out eventually," he said. 3 days later, the last human transport cleared Kepler Station's docking bay. Nick watched from the bridge of his ship as the massive structure grew smaller in the view screen. Somewhere in his quarters, he had a bottle of Terran whiskey that Dr. Martinez had given him for his birthday. Tonight seemed like the right time to open it. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Helen Brooke sat in the secure briefing room beneath the Capitol building. The walls were lined with screens showing the status of human evacuation efforts across 17 worlds. Green lights indicated successful evacuations. Yellow lights meant operations in progress, and red lights marked colonies that were having trouble getting everyone out in time. Admiral Tony Rodriguez entered the room carrying a thick folder marked with security classifications that made it clear this was information few people were cleared to see. "Ma'am, the Joint Chiefs have completed their analysis of Exodus Protocol implementation." Helen had hoped never to use Exodus Protocol. The plan had been developed during humanity's early years in the Council as a worst-case scenario response to exactly what was happening now. If humans were ever expelled from galactic society, they would take everything with them. "How bad is it going to be, Admiral?" she asked. Tony opened the folder and consulted the first page. "Worse than the Council realizes, better than we feared for our own people. Our evacuation is ahead of schedule. The civilian population is being relocated to colony worlds outside Council space, and our military assets are already repositioning. And the technology transfers? Complete. Every piece of hybrid technology, every joint research project, every system that relies on human innovation is being stripped out or will fail within 6 months. The Council species contributed the hardware, but humans provided the software, the maintenance protocols, and the operational knowledge." Helen rubbed her temples where a headache was forming. "They're going to blame us when their systems start failing." "Let them," Tony said with more anger than she usually heard from him. "We spent 30 years trying to help build a better galaxy. We shared our knowledge freely, we defended their worlds, we solved their problems. If they want to paint us as the villains, that's their choice." Through the quantum communication network that humans had designed and maintained, reports were already coming in from across Council space. The Zephyrian Trade Authority was experiencing minor shipping delays as navigation systems began showing small errors. Nothing dramatic yet, just efficiency dropping from human-optimized levels back to what alien computers could manage on their own. The Cronin military was conducting exercises and finding their tactical scenarios strangely predictable. For 15 years, human strategic advisors had provided the unpredictable element that made their war games realistic. Without that human input, their artificial intelligence systems fell back on standard alien military doctrine. Most concerning were the reports from medical facilities on 12 different worlds. The Vorthan plague, contained for 15 years using treatment protocols developed by Dr. Martinez and his team, was showing signs of resistance to standard treatments. The human doctors who had understood the disease's complex interaction with different alien biologies were gone, taking their knowledge with them. On Hilarion Colony World HR-7, Dr. Gentar Meth stared at a patient whose condition was deteriorating, despite following the established treatment protocol exactly. The human doctor who had trained him, Dr. Sarah Kim, had always made small adjustments based on intuition and experience. Gentar had the written procedures, but not the human insight that made them work. Back on Earth, in a small apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Dr. Sarah Kim sat at her kitchen table reading reports from her former colleagues through carefully encrypted channels. 12 of her patients had died in the past week because Hillyrian doctors couldn't adapt the treatments the way humans could. She wanted to help. Every instinct told her to get on the next ship and return to HR-7 to save lives. But the Council had been clear. Humans were not welcome. Her help was not wanted. Meanwhile, Chancellor Vextar reviewed reports from across Council space in his private office on Nexus Prime. The documents painted a picture of minor inconveniences and small efficiency losses. Nothing that couldn't be managed. Nothing that justified reconsidering the Council's decision. The Chancellor's aide, a younger Zephyrian named Kextar, entered with the day's final report. Sir, there are some concerning developments in the medical sector. Several facilities are reporting difficulties with treatment protocols that were developed during the human partnership. Vexter waved one of his forearms dismissively. Growing pains. The medical staff will adapt. We managed perfectly well before humans arrived, and we'll manage perfectly well now that they're gone. But even as he said the words, the Chancellor felt a small doubt creeping into his mind. The galaxy did seem quieter without human activity, but quiet wasn't necessarily the same thing as peaceful. For the first time since the vote, Vextar wondered if unanimous decisions were always the right decisions. 6 months had passed since the expulsion began, and the true cost was just starting to reveal itself. Director Casey Williams sat in the command center of Earth's orbital monitoring station and watched the galaxy tear itself apart through intercepted communications. 8 months had passed since the last human ship left Council space, and the reports flooding in told a story of systematic collapse. The massive screens around him displayed data streams from 1,000 different sources. Trade route efficiency down 40%. Communication network failures up 300%. Medical emergency declarations from 17 worlds. Military incidents increasing across 4 sectors. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Ben Cooper from his monitoring station. "We're getting another distress call from the Hillyrian Confederacy. Their quantum communication network just lost 3 more relay stations." Casey nodded without looking away from his primary display. The quantum communication system had been humanity's gift to the galaxy, a marvel of engineering that allowed instant communication across vast distances. But it wasn't just the hardware that made it work. Human technicians had developed the maintenance protocols, the error correction algorithms, and the diagnostic systems that kept the network running. Now, without human oversight, the elegant system was becoming a maintenance nightmare. Hillyrian engineers followed the written procedures perfectly, but they couldn't adapt when problems arose that weren't covered in the manuals. They thought in terms of following instructions, while humans thought in terms of understanding principles. "Any word from the Galactic Trade Authority?" Casey asked. "Yes, ma'am," replied Sergeant Lisa Park. "Shipping delays are now averaging 6 days per route. They're reporting navigation system malfunctions, route optimization failures, and cargo management problems." Casey allowed himself a small smile. For 20 years, human programmers had refined the galactic shipping algorithms, finding efficiencies that alien computers had missed. They had studied traffic patterns, predicted bottlenecks, and developed routing systems that reduced shipping times by 60%. The aliens had the computers, but they didn't have the human intuition that made those computers truly effective. Without human input, the systems were reverting to basic alien logic patterns that were safe but inefficient. "What about military reports?" he asked. Captain Dan Miller looked up from his intelligence console with a grim expression. "The Cronin Empire is in trouble, ma'am. 3 of their recent military exercises ended in complete tactical failures. Their AI systems are making predictable moves that any competent enemy could counter." This didn't surprise Casey. For 15 years, human military advisors had worked with Cronin forces, not to make them more aggressive, but to make them more creative. Cronin military doctrine was built around overwhelming force and direct confrontation. Humans had introduced concepts like misdirection, psychological warfare, and adaptive tactics. The Cronin artificial intelligence had been trained on databases that included human strategic thinking. Without constant updates and refinements from human military minds, the AI was falling back on pure Cronin doctrine, which made their forces predictable and vulnerable. But the most disturbing reports were coming from the medical sector. "Lieutenant Cooper," Casey said, "bring up the medical emergency summary." The main screen shifted to display a map of Council space with red warning indicators scattered across dozens of worlds. Each indicator represented a medical crisis that was spiraling out of control. The Vorthon plague, Ben reported, is now active on 23 worlds. Hillyrian doctors are following the treatment protocols exactly as written, but patient mortality rates are climbing every week. Casey had known this would happen. Dr. Alex Chen and his team had developed the Vorthon plague treatment, but it wasn't a simple formula that could be applied universally. The disease interacted differently with each species' biology, and successful treatment required constant adjustment based on patient response. The written protocols were a starting point, but they required human medical intuition to be truly effective. Human doctors observed symptoms that weren't in the textbooks, noticed patterns that alien physicians missed, and made adjustments based on experience and instinct. "How many casualties are we looking at?" Casey asked. "Conservative estimates suggest 50,000 deaths in the next 6 months if current trends continue," Ben replied. "The Hillyrian Medical Authority has sent 3 separate requests for human assistance through back channels." Casey felt the familiar weight of responsibility. Human medical teams could solve this crisis in weeks, but the Council had made their position clear. Human help was not wanted. "Our official response?" he asked. "President Brooks's directive stands," Captain Miller said. "We offered assistance through proper diplomatic channels. The Council refused. We will not violate their quarantine order." On the far side of the galaxy, General Thulgax paced in his command center on the Cronin homeworld and tried to understand how his military had become so ineffective so quickly. The reptilian general's scarred hide reflected the lights of the tactical displays showing the results of the latest war games. Complete failure. Again. His forces had been outmaneuvered by a simulation that should have been easily defeated. The enemy AI had anticipated every move, countered every strategy, and crushed his fleet with embarrassing efficiency. "How is this possible?" he hissed to his tactical advisor. "We are using the same strategies that brought us victory for 2 centuries. "General," the advisor replied carefully, "the simulation AI is programmed with tactical databases from 12 different species, including human strategic doctrine. Our current strategies appear to have become predictable." Thulgax's yellow eyes glowed with anger. For 15 years, human military advisors had worked alongside Cronin officers. He had always assumed they were learning from Cronin tactical superiority. Now he realized the truth was the opposite. The humans had been teaching his people to think differently, to approach warfare with creativity instead of just brute force. Without human influence, Cronin military thinking had reverted to its traditional patterns which were effective against enemies who fought the same way. But any opponent with access to Cronin tactical history could now predict their moves with frightening accuracy. Meanwhile, on the Hillyrian colony world HR-7, Dr. Gentar, Meth watched another patient die despite his best efforts. The Vorthon plague victim had received exactly the treatment specified in the human-developed protocols, but something had gone wrong. The patient's biochemistry had reacted unexpectedly to the medication, causing a cascading organ failure that the manuals didn't address. This was the 15th patient he had lost in 2 weeks. Before the humans left, Dr. Sarah Kim would have recognized the early warning signs and adjusted the treatment accordingly. She had possessed an intuitive understanding of how different species biologies interacted with the plague that no textbook could capture. Gentar stared at the treatment protocols on his screen. Every word was there, every procedure was documented, but the essence of what made them work was gone. It was like having the sheet music but not understanding the song. In his private office, he composed another message to the human medical team, knowing it would be rejected like all the others. The council had forbidden contact with humans, and the humans were following that order to the letter. Back on Nexus Prime, Chancellor Vextar received his weekly summary from the Council's various departments. The reports painted an increasingly troubling picture of declining efficiency across all sectors, but his advisors assured him these were temporary adjustments. "The medical emergencies are concerning," admitted his chief aide, Kextar. "Perhaps we should consider a limited exception to the human exclusion for humanitarian purposes." Vextar's silver skin darkened with irritation. "Absolutely not. We cannot show weakness now. The galaxy must learn to function without human interference. These problems will resolve themselves in time." But privately, the Chancellor was beginning to wonder if his unanimous vote had been the right decision. Reports of system failures, communication breakdowns, and medical crises were increasing every week. The galaxy hadn't just lost human ships and stations. It had lost human knowledge, human innovation, and human problem-solving abilities. For the first time since the expulsion vote, Vextar allowed himself to consider a disturbing possibility. What if the humans hadn't been the problem? What if they had been the solution to problems that the Council hadn't even realized existed? 8 months after humanity's departure, the galaxy was learning a harsh lesson about the difference between following procedures and understanding principles. The unraveling had begun, and there was no easy way to stop it. 2 years had passed since the Galactic Council expelled humanity, and Intelligence Officer Ryan Smith stared at reports that painted a picture of galactic civilization in free fall. The monitoring station orbiting Earth buzzed with activity as hundreds of analysts tracked the deteriorating situation across Council space. "Admiral Rodriguez," Ryan called to his commanding officer, "the latest casualty reports are coming in from the Outer Rim. The Vorthon plague has now spread to 47 worlds. Conservative estimates put civilian deaths at over 200,000. Admiral Tony Rodriguez walked over to Ryan's station and studied the data with a grim expression. The plague that had been contained for 15 years was now raging unchecked across multiple star systems. Hillyrian doctors had the treatment protocols, but lacked the human insight needed to adapt them to different species and evolving strains of the disease. "Any response from the Council Medical Authority?" Tony asked. "They've requested emergency assistance through back channels 6 times in the past month," Ryan replied. "Each time we've directed them to submit formal diplomatic requests through proper Council channels. And each time they've refused to do that because it would mean admitting they need human help," Tony concluded. "How many more people have to die because of their pride?" Across the galaxy, 3 separate brush wars had erupted in sectors that had been peaceful for decades. Without human mediation and peacekeeping forces, old territorial disputes were flaring into open conflict. The Zephyrian Collective was fighting border skirmishes with the Altarian Republic. The Cronin Empire was dealing with internal rebellions on 3 colony worlds. The Hillyrian Confederacy was fracturing as member worlds questioned the leadership that had voted to expel their most valuable allies. Captain Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of her new command, the Earth battleship Defiance, and watched a Zephyrian merchant vessel drift helplessly in space beyond the quarantine boundary. The ship's distress beacon had been broadcasting for 6 hours, and Harper's crew had monitored increasingly desperate communications as the vessel's life support systems failed. "Captain," called Lieutenant Dave Murphy from the communications station, "the merchant ship is requesting permission to approach Earth for emergency assistance." Harper activated her ship's communication system and opened a channel to the distressed vessel. "Zephyrian merchant vessel, this is Captain Harper of the Earth ship Defiance. What is the nature of your emergency?" The response came in heavily, accented standard, the universal language that humans had helped develop. "Captain Harper, this is Captain Jendar Keth of the trading ship Swift Current. Our drive systems have failed and our life support is degrading. We have 47 refugees aboard from 3 different worlds, all seeking medical treatment that their own doctors cannot provide." Harper felt the familiar ache of wanting to help, but being bound by regulations that weren't of her making. "Captain Keth, I understand your situation, but the Galactic Council has forbidden contact between our species. I can offer you emergency supplies and coordinates to the nearest non-human medical facility, but I cannot allow you to enter Earth space." Captain, Keth's voice cracked with desperation. These people will die if they don't receive proper treatment. Your human doctors understood their conditions. Our doctors follow the same procedures but cannot achieve the same results. I'm sorry, Captain, Harper replied, genuinely meaning it. The Council quarantine order applies to all human space. I cannot violate those restrictions. Even as she spoke the words, Harper's medical officer was preparing emergency supply packages that could keep the refugee ship stable until they reached non-human medical facilities. It was all she could do within the constraints the Council had imposed. Meanwhile, on the Cronin homeworld, General Thulgax faced a crisis that threatened to destroy his military career, and possibly the Empire itself. 3 of his most experienced officers had submitted formal letters of resignation, citing tactical incompetence in the high command as their reason for leaving. The latest military simulation had been a disaster. Cronin forces, once feared across the galaxy for their tactical prowess, had been systematically destroyed by an enemy AI that anticipated their every move. The general's traditional strategies, which had worked for centuries, were now completely predictable to any opponent with access to Cronin military history. General, his aide reported nervously, the Colonial Defense Committee is requesting a full review of our current tactical doctrines. They're questioning whether our forces can adequately defend Empire territories. Thulgax's reptilian features twisted with rage and frustration. For 15 years, human military advisors had worked alongside his officers. He had tolerated their presence because the Council required joint cooperation, but he had never imagined how much his forces had come to depend on human strategic thinking. The humans had introduced concepts that seemed foreign to traditional Cronin warfare but had proven devastatingly effective. They had taught his officers to think like their enemies, to anticipate unexpected moves, to use misdirection and psychological tactics alongside brute force. Without that human influence, Cronin military doctrine had reverted to its ancient patterns, which made their forces strong but predictable. Any enemy with access to their tactical databases could now counter their strategies with ease. On the other side of the galaxy, the Hillyrian Confederacy was experiencing its own crisis of confidence. Dr. Zara Velnoth sat in the emergency session of the Confederacy Science Council and listened to reports that painted a picture of scientific stagnation. The quantum communication network is now operating at 30% efficiency, reported the chief engineer. We've lost contact with 18 colonies and expect to lose contact with 12 more within the next month. Our medical research programs have ground to a complete halt, added the head of biological sciences. Without human insight into cross-species biological interactions, we cannot make progress on any of our current projects. The agricultural colonies are reporting crop failures on 7 worlds, continued the agricultural advisor. The hybrid crops developed through human-Hillyrian cooperation are failing because we don't understand the genetic modifications well enough to maintain them. Dr. Velnoth stood up and spoke with quiet authority. Colleagues, we must face reality. Our civilization has become dependent on human innovation and problem-solving abilities. Without them, we are reverting to pre-contact technology levels. Room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. The Hillyrian Confederacy had made remarkable technological advances during their partnership with humanity. But those advances were built on human scientific methodology that thought in ways alien minds couldn't replicate. Back on Earth, President Helen Brooks reviewed intelligence reports in the Situation Room and tried to process the scale of the disaster unfolding across the galaxy. Trade routes were collapsing, communication networks were failing, medical systems were breaking down, and military forces were becoming ineffective. "Ma'am," Admiral Rodriguez said, "we're receiving desperate pleas for assistance from 17 different worlds. The death toll from the Vorthon plague alone is approaching 500,000. Helen felt the weight of those lives on her conscience. Human medical teams could end the plague crisis in months, but the Council had made their position clear. Humanity was not welcome. Our standing orders remain unchanged," she said, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. "We offered our assistance through proper diplomatic channels. The Council refused. We will not violate their quarantine order." "With respect, Madam President," said Secretary of State Tom Anderson, "how long can we maintain this position while watching millions die from problems we know how to solve?" Helen stared at the casualty projections on her screen and wondered the same thing. The Council had expelled humanity to create peace, but their decision was causing more death and suffering than any war in recent galactic history. Meanwhile, in his private chambers on Nexus Prime, Chancellor Vextar sat alone with reports that he couldn't ignore any longer. The galaxy was falling apart, and his advisors were running out of explanations that didn't involve admitting their mistake. The communication network that connected the Council worlds was failing. The medical systems that had prevented plagues for decades were breaking down. The trade routes that supported galactic commerce were becoming unreliable. The military forces that maintained peace were becoming predictable and ineffective. For the first time since the expulsion vote, Vextar allowed himself to fully consider what the galaxy had lost when humanity left. It wasn't just their ships and stations. It wasn't just their technology and knowledge, it was their way of thinking, their ability to see solutions that other species missed, their willingness to act when action was needed. The galaxy had removed its problem solvers and was now drowning in problems that seemed impossible to solve without them. 5 years had passed since the Galactic Council expelled humanity, and the galaxy bore scars that would take generations to heal. President Helen Brooks stood at the window of her office overlooking the rebuilt city of New Geneva and reflected on how much the universe had changed. The reports on her desk told a story of complete civilizational collapse across much of Council space. The Hillyrian Confederacy had withdrawn from the Galactic Alliance after losing contact with half their colonies. The Cronin Empire was fighting a brutal civil war that had already claimed millions of lives. 17 worlds had gone completely dark, their populations either dead or fled to human space seeking refuge. "Madam President," her aide announced, "you have a visitor. He insists on meeting with you privately." Helen turned from the window with curiosity. Very few beings could demand private meetings with the President of Earth, and fewer still would be granted them. "Who is it?" "Chancellor Vexitar of the Zephyrian Collective, ma'am. He arrived an hour ago in a small diplomatic vessel with minimal escort." Helen felt her eyebrows rise in surprise. The proud Zephyrian leader who had led the vote to expel humanity was here on Earth alone, asking for a meeting. This was either the beginning of something important or a trap that she couldn't yet see. "Send him to the secure conference room," she said, "and make sure Admiral Rodriguez is available if I need him." 20 minutes later, Helen sat across from the being who had changed the course of galactic history with a single vote. "Chancellor." Vextar looked older than she remembered, his silver skin dulled and his forearms moving with less confidence than she had seen in their previous encounters. "Chancellor," she said with careful politeness, "this is unexpected. I thought humans were forbidden from having contact with Council representatives." Vextar's large eyes met hers, and she saw something she had never seen before in a Zephyrian leader: humility. "President Brooks, I come to you not as a Council representative, but as the leader of a dying civilization, seeking help from the only people who might be able to save us." Helen leaned back in her chair and waited for him to continue. After 5 years of watching the galaxy tear itself apart, she wanted to hear the Chancellor admit what she had known from the beginning. "We made an error," Vexitar said, the words seeming to cost him physical pain. "The Council voted to remove humanity because we believed you were too aggressive, too unpredictable. We thought the galaxy would be more peaceful without your interference. And how has that worked out for you?" Helen asked with a tone that could have cut metal. "The galaxy is dying," Vextar admitted. "Our communication networks have collapsed. Our medical systems cannot cope with diseases that were contained for decades. Our trade routes are failing, our colonies are abandoned, and our military forces cannot maintain order. Wars rage where once there was peace. People die from diseases that your doctors could cure in days." Helen stood and walked to the wall display that showed a map of the galaxy. Red zones indicated areas of conflict, yellow zones showed regions with failing infrastructure, and green zones marked the few remaining stable areas. The green zones were clustered around human space, where refugee populations had fled, seeking the stability and innovation that humanity provided. "Chancellor, you misunderstood something fundamental about humanity," she said without turning around. "You thought we were aggressive, but we weren't. We were protective. Every conflict you cited as evidence of our violence was us defending those who couldn't defend themselves." She turned back to face him and saw that he was listening with the attention of someone who finally understood the scope of his mistake. "The Kepler system intervention that you called unprovoked aggression," she continued. "We stopped Cronin forces from bombarding civilian colonies. The medical missions you called interference were us treating diseases that killed millions of your people. The peacekeeping operations you called violations of sovereignty were us preventing wars that would have devastated entire star systems." Vextar's skin darkened with what Helen recognized as Zephyrian shame. "We see that now. But understanding our error does not repair the damage we have caused. President Brooks, the galaxy needs humanity to return. We need your medical knowledge, your technological innovations, your ability to solve problems that seem impossible to everyone else." Helen sat back down and studied the Chancellor's face. 5 years of reports had prepared her for this moment. But actually hearing the proud alien leader admit his mistake still felt surreal. "What exactly are you asking for, Chancellor?" "Full restoration of human membership in the Galactic Council," he said. "Immediate deployment of human medical teams to combat the plagues that are killing millions of our people. Human engineers to repair our communication and transportation networks. Human peacekeepers to end the wars that are tearing our worlds apart." Helen was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. Outside the window, she could see the bustling activity of New Geneva, the city that had become the unofficial capital of the growing human alliance. Ships from dozens of species that had abandoned council space arrived daily, bringing refugees and requests for assistance. "Chancellor," she said finally, "you're asking us to return to the same system that expelled us, the same council that voted unanimously to remove us, the same alliance that called our help unwanted interference. Why should we trust that you won't change your minds again when the immediate crisis is over?" Vextar leaned forward, and for the first time, Helen heard desperation in his voice. "Because we finally understand what we lost. It wasn't just your ships or your technology. It was your way of thinking, your willingness to act when others hesitate, your ability to see solutions that escape everyone else. And what guarantee do we have that this understanding will last?" "You have my word as Chancellor of the Zephyrian Collective," he said. "And more importantly, you have the evidence of what happens when the galaxy tries to function without human innovation and compassion." Helen stood again and walked to her desk, where she activated a communication system. "Admiral Rodriguez, please join us in the secure conference room." While they waited, Helen considered the request. 5 years of watching the galaxy collapse had proven everything humanity had tried to tell the Council before their expulsion. Humans weren't the problem. They were the solution to problems that other species couldn't solve on their own. Admiral Rodriguez entered the room and nodded respectfully to both leaders. "Madam President," Admiral Rodriguez reporting as requested. "Admiral," Helen said, "the Chancellor has requested that humanity return to the Galactic Council and provide immediate assistance with the crises currently devastating Council space. What's your assessment?" Rodriguez had spent 5 years preparing for this moment. "Ma'am, our analysis suggests that human intervention could end the Vorthon plague within 6 months, restore galactic communication networks within a year, and establish lasting peace in the conflict zones within 18 months. However, I would recommend that any return to galactic society be on our terms, not theirs." Helen nodded and turned back to Chancellor Vextar. "Chancellor, humanity is willing to help end the suffering in Council space, but we won't be returning as junior members of an alliance that has already expelled us once." "What are you proposing?" he asked. "A new alliance," Helen said, "not dominated by the old Council, but built on principles of genuine cooperation and mutual respect. Humanity will lead the humanitarian relief efforts and help rebuild galactic civilization, but we'll do it as equals, not as subordinates." Vextar considered this for several minutes before responding. "The remaining Council members will resist this proposal, They will see it as humanity taking advantage of our desperation. Then they can continue to watch their civilizations collapse, Helen said with finality. We spent 30 years trying to help build a better galaxy under your leadership. The results speak for themselves. If you want our help now, it will be on terms that prevent this disaster from happening again. 6 months later, Captain Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of the hospital ship Mercy and watched medical teams deployed to another plague-stricken world. The ship was one of 50 vessels in the human humanitarian fleet that was systematically ending health crises across the galaxy. Behind her, the construction of New Geneva Station was visible through the viewports. The massive structure was rising from the asteroid belt, not as a replacement for the old council chambers, but as the headquarters of a new kind of galactic alliance, one built on the principle that true peace required those willing to fight for it. The Galactic Council had removed humanity to create peace, but had only succeeded in proving that peace without justice was just another form of chaos. Now, as human ships spread across the galaxy bringing medical aid, technological solutions, and hope to desperate worlds, the universe was learning what humanity had always known. Sometimes the most aggressive thing you can do is refuse to let others suffer when you have the power to help them. Sometimes interference is just another word for compassion. And sometimes being too willing to fight is exactly what the galaxy needs to find peace. The Council had paid the price for their pride, but more importantly, they had learned that civilization wasn't about following rules or maintaining order. It was about caring for each other,